Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, John. I didn't want to resort. Whoa. That's all right. We good? Good evening and welcome to the first ever Legacy Foundation program here at Liberty Hill. I'm John Miko. I'm the Executive Director of the Union League Legacy Foundation, and it's my great pleasure to be able to welcome you to this absolutely gorgeous piece of property and fantastic facility. We are thrilled to be here. This will be the first of, I'm sure, many programs that we do on this property. The Legacy Foundation, as you all know, our mission is to use the history, the values, the spirit of this great institution, the Union League of Philadelphia, for educational programs, for scholarship programs, lectures like this, exhibits, all in the hopes that we create more involved, better informed citizen leaders. And we have talked about that history, of course, is starting in the American Civil War. And now our history has a direct connection to some, 46 years before that, or something like that, in the American Revolution, of course, which all started this. So it was saved. You could say that this great republic, this great experiment, was saved during the Civil War and in part by the Union League, but it started in part here at the Union League as well at Liberty Hill, and we're going to hear more about that from our speaker in a moment. But again, it's my great pleasure to welcome you. I want to thank the staff from Liberty Hill, and some of whom are new to us, some of whom are not. Sean Palmer, of course, the general manager here, and Michelle Christensen, and the great staff, Eric and Vince, Emily, Laura. Thank you for doing a great job, and we're going to be up here a lot, and we look forward to that. And of course, the Legacy Foundation staff, Becca Benton, Kira Foley-Tusman, Joe Ianni, and our historian, Jim Mundy. So thank you. I want to take just one moment to recognize two Union League members who, to say they've embraced the history here would be an understatement. George and Michelle Turak. Some of you know George and Michelle. George and Michelle have been, they're great patriots. George, having served in the Vietnam War, and is a great, if you don't know this about George, he's a great collector of art. And we've had many of his pieces on display in the League over the years. And when we purchased Liberty Hill, he said, I think I have a piece that might be perfect at Liberty Hill. And not only is it perfect, and I think many of you have seen it, it's the painting that's down in the bar, and it's of Washington at Valley Forge. It includes Lafayette in the image. It's an absolutely beautiful and perfect image in both theme and style and size. And that has been generously donated by George and Michelle, and I want to thank them. Where are you, George and Michelle? Oh, back here. So finally, just a few pieces of housekeeping. Our speaker, Paul Sanborn, will speak for about 35 or 40 minutes. We will have a Q&A section, and we will have staff that will hand you the microphone. Please do your best to make that question 2-3 sentences absolutely tops. And as always, make sure that at the end, if you can't end that sentence with a question mark, you have failed, right? And Joe right here, he actually has the audio. He will flip you off, okay? Sorry. And if you're watching on Zoom, you can use the Q&A function on your Zoom, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. So our speaker tonight is, I hesitate to call him this because he'd probably get mad. In the short time I've known him, he wouldn't want to be called a Renaissance man, but I think he probably is. Paul Sanborn is an educator. an administrator, an author, a coach, a historian. He himself is a veteran who served with distinction in Vietnam. He is a teacher, I think, first and foremost, having taught at and still teaches at Devon Prep, where he's been as a student, as a teacher, as an administrator, as a coach for 61 years. He holds a BA, and I love this educational summary, a BA in Russian Studies from Villanova, an MA in Philosophy from Westchester, an MBA from St. Joe's, an MED in Educational Leadership for Elementary and Secondary Principalship from Cheney, and an MA in Land Warfare from the American Military University. I can't wait to hear our guest tonight, Paul Sanborn. Paul.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. This is an opportunity for me to be in ecstasy, and I don't get to do that much because my people come from New Hampshire, and we're Puritans, and smiling is a major physical event. We suffer here and reward it in the heaven above. So this is a great night for me because you're on the battlefield of Barren Hill. You know, not much was memorialized in the Revolutionary and early Republic period in this country's history. That came along with the Victorian period and the Romanticism of the mid-19th century, where everything basically got a statue or a plaque or whatever. And you go to places like Shiloh and Chickamauga and Vicksburg and Gettysburg, you see it looks like a mausoleum, a cemetery of all these monuments. Gettysburg has 1,300 roughly. And so that's how I met my wife. No, I'm sorry. That's how I got my wife to marry me. I took her to Gettysburg and we read the monuments. And after some time, she said, I'll do anything to get away from here. I said, anything? You have no idea what I looked like then. Anyway, well, I've improved somewhat, so you can judge from there. So here we are at Barren Hill. And as I said, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. We're talking about the Revolutionary War, and one comforting thing is, for the most part, I'm not saying anyone here, but for the most part, if you stand up like Wayne Motz is going to do at the end of this month, talk about Pickett's charge, it's like, I don't know, Gone with the Wind or Cinderella or Star Wars. You can't say a word without 4,000 people raising their hands and telling you what you said wrong. Whereas with the revolution, you're more or less able to say just about anything, and as long as you keep a straight face, people will believe you. These people were fully alive in their period, and these people did what they could with what they had. And when Lafayette got back to the camp, there were no videos or, you know, shorthand people taking down testimony. But I can assure you that he talked to Washington and the other generals there at Valley Forge, the encampment. And they talked about what happened here. And what happened here was extremely significant. And so therefore, that's why it should be memorialized today. And I'm hoping we can persuade the Union League not to build homes on this golf course, that we keep it open, because this is really primary land, along with St. Peter's Lutheran Church. So those are two sites right here that very significant in the American Revolutionary War. So we started off talking about the context, and I'm not going to talk much about Washington tonight, but I am going to talk somewhat about Admiral Howe, General Howe, Lafayette, and then the other people that were involved in this action. When you leave here tonight, I hope that you'll be able to understand really what happened here as far as we can do the job for you. Again, one reason why it's a mysterious period is because it was relatively primitive ways of communication and documentation and what have you. And then you have the early historians who, obfuscated a lot of what we do know by building on the themes of the American dream, American values, and they weren't as concerned as we are today with the history, the scientific history that developed in the German universities in the 19th century, where if you can't document it, you shouldn't say it. So basically, again, it becomes very mysterious to many people because there's gaps, great gaps in what we know. And anyone who's ever been in a battle knows that if I start to make sense talking about one, you can be sure I'm lying. Because everyone sees something. The battle is just like that elephant with the wise men that come in and they say, well, one guy, the blind guy, says the elephant's tail means that the elephant's like a snake. And then the other blind guy touches the trunk and says, oh no, it's bigger than a snake and thicker. It could be a lamprey or something. And then the guy touches the tusk and says, no, he's sharp and bony. And that's the way a battle is. And of course, the private soldiers generally did not do a lot of writing at this time. So we don't know what they thought in general. Every so often we do have a document, but it's not as widespread as, say, in the Civil War, where so many people recorded what happened, at least what they thought happened. So we'll start off, first of all, I want to call your attention to the Howes. They were very instrumental in the British effort to put down the rebellion in these colonies. Remember, there were more colonies in this hemisphere than 13. Only 13 rebelled. We did send expeditions into Canada to try to get them to come over to our side, but there was such antipathy with the Canadians towards the New Englanders, and they called the Yankees, that basically we're only able to get a regiment or two of men to commit to us, and the Canadians remained loyal to the crown for the most part throughout the war. So when the war started, Admiral Howe and William Howe, two brothers, their older brother, George, was killed in the approach to Fort Ticonderoga under Abercrombie in 1758 during the French and Indian War. And the Howe family was predisposed favorably towards the Americans. They had served with the Americans, they knew them, and while Americans are not perfect, the Howe brothers felt comfortable that they didn't have to discriminate openly and violently against the American rebels. General Grant, who plays a big role here, James Grant, he's not that. He's in the Revolutionary War, but he's also in the French and Indian War. He meets a lot of these people, including Washington, out on the frontier near Fort Duquesne, Fort Pitt, in the French and Indian War, and he has a very low opinion of you. And basically he announces, according to the myths, we don't know exactly if he did, member of Parliament, and he announces to everyone in England, when he hears the war, the fighting has broken out in 75, that he could take, the Americans are such an incorrigible lot of brigands and degenerates that he could take 5,000 men and march through this whole continent and conquer and put down the rebellion. So his is going to be a starring role here at Barren Hill because he's going to command the hammer, and Howe himself is going to be the anvil. And he's going to march around behind Washington and behind Lafayette and put Lafayette in a vice and crush him. The problem with Grant is he deteriorated over time. Unlike fine wine, he did not get better. And what happens is, first of all, he has a whole flock of geese and chickens and other fowl following him right in his camp. Don't worry, the Americans had Charles Lee, and Charles Lee could only relate well to dogs. And he had dogs with him constantly and talked to them. And he was the typical dog owner today, which is not common in the Revolutionary period. So General Grant loved these birds. And he would have his steward, his Batman, prepare the birds for him. And they did. They slaughtered the birds, wrung their necks, and plucked them, and then prepared them. General Grant, in his entire time in the Revolutionary War, never missed a meal and never had a meal interrupted. And that's saying something. He was what we call in the business, the 18th century, corpulent. There was a lot of them to go around. And he was almost inert. And at mealtime, he was, like the Rock of Gibraltar. And so when Grant gets over here, he's going to be a part of this main army under General Howe. Admiral Howe, nicknamed Black Dick, and we'll let all that imagery pass by us. Admiral Howe was the Lord. He took the Howe title after his brother George had been killed at Ticonderoga. And Admiral Howe was predisposed to favorably treat the rebels. He wanted to give the rebels a chance. He was not as hardcore as his brother William. And so what happens is Black Dick actually tries to bring the two sides together. He will be in charge of the Navy, and he does outrank his younger brother, Billy. He goes on after the war. He goes on, the British Parliament passed a Prohibitory Act, which meant that anyone who was captured had any kind of assets, they could be seized by the government because of their rebellion. And, Black Dick didn't want his men on the ships intersecting vessels that perhaps belonged to Tories and confiscating the vessel. Well, that's a policy that has no one happy, because in fact, if you're not going to confiscate the vessels, well, first of all, the Americans are going to pick that up very quickly, and they're going to say, hey, guess what? We're rebels. As soon as we get to Atlantic City or whatever, we're rebels. But right now, we're loyal citizens. We're Tories. So not only did that affect the Tories, but it affected the captains of the Navy in Howe's fleet, because they had money that they earned from capturing enemy vessels. And this was declared a war by Great Britain. And so they were treated as enemy soldiers and enemy sailors and enemy ships. Between January 1st and May 1st of 1777, Howe's fleet intercepted 230 ships. Now, this was from a guy that was seen lenient by the British government. And he also captured about 12 British ships that had been captured by the American rebels, and he reverted them to service with the British. So he was doing his job, but he was trying to have a peace commission to work with the rebels. He is going to physically be here on this battlefield. He comes out with his brother. Along with him, we have General Clinton. And General Clinton is a man that has trouble getting along with anybody, which is just his personality. It helps to put Cornwallis at Yorktown, which is another topic for another day. But General Clinton and Howe are rivals, and they're different. And General Clinton, some people suggested that he was involved with Major Andre, but he was in second in command, and he was in New York. Howe left him in New York in 1777 to invade Pennsylvania. And when that, Clinton was responsible to go towards Albany and join up with Burgoyne, and he only made it to Kingston, which is the capital that time of New York State. He burned Kingston and came back to New York, and Burgoyne eventually capitulated to Gates at Saratoga. So you have Clinton, you have Black Dick Howe, you have Grant, and then you have William Howe. There's a new book out this month, and we really have improved on the scholarship, in my opinion, over the past 50 years. There's a new book called The Howe Dynasty. It's about a British, it's about a British family closely related to the House of Hanover, of which George III is the third monarch. And George III is the first monarch to actually speak English as his mother tongue. The rest of them, George I and II, spoke German as their first language. So he was theoretically, educated and indoctrinated in the culture of Great Britain, but he was still an absolute monarch, living in a country that had a different tradition. And he saw this as a personal attack on himself and his reign. So the Howes, the critical person is a person that you've probably never heard of. I mean, apologize if you had, great. But Caroline was their sister. And she played an instrumental role in keeping the Howes in power in England, Great Britain, during this entire affair and later. So when the time comes, William's career will not be altered. William's career will not be ended by his actions here in the colonies. He basically will survive as a member of Parliament because of his sister, who liked to play chess with Ben Franklin while he was the ambassador from Pennsylvania to Great Britain before the war began. And very, very instrumental in getting Franklin to negotiate with British agents and so forth to end this war. William, general in the Army, commanded the Army, Admiral Howe went on to serve, and I want to mention this, he served with honor at the Spithead Mutiny. I'm not sure if you heard of that, but the British treated their sailors like crap. And the people who were in tune with the situation said, our men will fight. They don't need to be forced to fight, they will fight. And if you respected them and treated them with respect and so on and demanded that they perform their duties without the threat of the lash, they would. And of course, the fleet mutinied at Spithead, and Admiral Howe was the one who solved that problem and agreed to terms with the sailors and ended that without further bloodshed. He was also the victor at the glorious 1st of June when the British in the Channel took on the French Revolutionary Naval Forces in 1794. So he went on to a distinguished career. And his brother William also went on to a distinguished career. So William Howe arrives to help General Gates at Boston after Lexington conquered, and he is involved at Breed's Hill. 50% of his men, basically, particularly officers, were either wounded or killed in that particular engagement. Some historians have interpreted his actions for the rest of the war as shock over losing that many professional soldiers. There are now newer interpretations, that, including this new one by the Howe dynasty. I'm talking to you as a reviewer of the book, all right? I got the copy from the publisher. So this woman has said she feels, it doesn't mean she's right, but she feels that Howe, for example, fought the Battle of Long Island. When his men defeated the Americans, he was sure that his men were out of control, and if he let them go on to attack Washington right away, that he'd lose control and lose the battle, because control and order and discipline were everything in a professional army at that time. The last thing you see, or the last thing you want to see, even a Marine officer like me, the last thing you want to see is your men charging pell-mell towards an enemy position. The machine guns today work very well, and they will bring you down. You need control. I know that sounds like an impossibility, but you just can't have people doing whatever they care to. And I really don't want to know who's the bravest, who's the fool that runs first, and who's the slowest. You want those men to come in and mass their firing power, just as they did in the 18th century. So that's what she's arguing. In any event, Howe goes with his fleet, with his brother. He goes to Delaware, to the head of Elk in Maryland, marches through Delaware, and takes Philadelphia, center of commerce in the United States rebelling colonies. Center of commerce, largest English-speaking city in the world behind London. The center of the American government in the Continental Congress. So this guy says, Burgoyne, and again, Monday morning quarterback, including Burgoyne, I was surrounded, I was overwhelmed. My God, he never came to my aid. That was all because of Germain and his idiocy and his incompetence in the clerks of his office and communicating with his commanding officers in this country. And so Howe never really thought Burgoyne was going to be stopped. How was Burgoyne going to be stopped? This is a revolution. The Washington's army is the main army. Where are the colonies going to, they can barely staff Washington's army. Where are they going to get men for another army that could stop Burgoyne? But they did. And some of the men who were the heart of that were from New Hampshire. And when you look through the Revolutionary War, every time New Hampshire comes on the field, including along the beach at Breed's Hill, John Stark, you'll see that New Hampshire was never beaten. And that's just like George Thomas in the Civil War. He was one of our greatest Union officers, and he never was beaten. I mean, even at Chickamauga, he was the one that saved the Army and fought just about every unit in Bragg's army through that afternoon on Snodgrass Hill. So what you have is you have General Howe taking Philadelphia. It's a very important city. Now, you have to understand what Philadelphia is. I know this is complicated, but you see, Philadelphia is not a good city to be in. I didn't say anything. Philadelphia is not a good city to be in. First of all, it's low ground. And therefore, at night, when the sun retires from the sky, removing its beneficent pressure from the surface of the earth, baleful effluvia of noxious swamp vapors come creeping out of the low-lying regions filled with animalculae. And those animalculae are inhaled by men primarily. Deep inhalations, because men snore and deeply inhale at night, inhale these formaculae and they get distemper, fluidic disharmony. They are not at ease. They are at dis-ease. And so it's a lousy place to go. And even, in fact, Washington fled with his government in '93 when the yellow fever broke out, and it broke out all the time in Philadelphia. Second, I don't know if you've been in Philadelphia. Remember, we're talking about Philadelphia. You're in Philadelphia County right now. No, don't start on me. There's no Montgomery County. There's no Delaware County. There's Philadelphia County. How far is Philadelphia County from Valley Forge? Valley Forge is in partially Philadelphia County because Upper Merion is part of Philadelphia County and it's Montgomery County today. So the city of Philadelphia ended at Spring Garden. And guess what? All along Spring Garden, 10 redoubts, fortified lines. And if you look at Philadelphia between Spring Garden and South Street and between Front Street and what? The suburbs at 7th Street, just beyond Pennsylvania Hospital. That's the suburbs, farms. There's the Schuylkill River in the west. There's the Delaware in the east. Have you tried to get across them? That's why we built them bridges, right? None of you are going to go wading across those rivers down there. So if you're in Philadelphia, you're trapped. And you're 50 miles to the Atlantic Ocean. And you need the Navy to keep you supplied. So the Philadelphia city is all the way down there. And he gets himself in that city. Hal gets himself in the city, and there, basically, he sits through the winter. And a very important happening during the winter was the French openly came in the war, and that changed everything. And when it became a world war then, the British had a real problem because, ready? 1 year, I can't imagine you wouldn't understand this completely. 1 year of commerce from West Indies was worth all of the output of the 13 colonies in North America. So guess who's after the West Indies? The French, the Dutch, the Spanish, the Americans, and the British. And Hamilton, remember, was born in what's the Caribbean, just outside it. So he would know. So what you have here is you have a whole change now. Howe is going back to defend himself in Parliament for his conduct of the war. Clinton has come down, early May, take over. His brother, Admiral Howe, is here, and they're already talking about what they're going to do. They have to evacuate Philadelphia. We got to get out of here. So what they're going to be trapped by the French fleet, and God help us, and we got to send troops to Cuba or to the West Indies to protect our holdings there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get out of Philadelphia. Washington knows this. Intelligence is operating fully. And so is intelligence for the British. Joseph Galloway, who very high Pennsylvania politician, who almost prevailed the First Continental Congress, helped Howe at Brandywine, supplying him with all kinds of intelligence. And that's one reason why Howe won, was able to slip around Washington's right flank and get in the rear. And that's what he's going to try here. And that's what he did at Long Island. So that's his favorite tactic. And he's going to employ it at Barren Hill. But he doesn't know about Barren Hill yet. But his intelligence picks up American movement. What American movement? Lafayette, 20 years old, Major General, the American Army. The only member of the royal family, not a member of the royal family, but of the admirers and sophisticants of the royal family, the close nobility. He is the first one to actually come to this country as a 19-year-old. He comes here and doesn't demand anything. He just wants to serve. And he will go on through the French Revolution and Napoleonic period and survive until the 1820s when he comes back here on a tour and then dies shortly thereafter. So he is Washington's pet. And during the winter of Valley Forge, he was assigned by Washington and Congress to go north and invade Canada. Why? Because he could speak French. Because he was French. As a matter of fact, he was a member of King Louis's Black Musketeers. He was a seasoned officer, and he was good at his job, even at 20 years old. So what he did was he was given part of Washington's army for reconnaissance and force. And he was told to come out and dance around, Well, Lafayette didn't do that. He came out and plopped right here, right where you're sitting, on this exact spot. He plopped. Now, he had 10 men with him. He had 1/3 of Washington's army. This was not a joke. This was a major effort. 1/3 of Washington's army. He had Enoch Poor's New Hampshire and New York Brigade, some of the best men in the Revolutionary Army. They maintained the center, right where we're standing, sitting. That's where they were, Enoch Poor. That's where my DNA was, because I had people in this war, every war. And so there we were. On the left flank, away from the river, that way, towards St. Peter's Lutheran Church, which is still there, but it's not the same building, but you see the graveyard and church. Right there was Varnum's brigade. New England troops, but the 1st and 2nd Rhode Island Regiment, and those regiments are famous for taking black freemen and allowing them to serve in the regular line, which Washington hated. And Henry Lawrence, President of Congress, hated, and so on, because of the race issues. But they were serving there, and they were on the left. And then out in front were 50 Oneida Indians. That's important because that was a lot of their manpower. That's important because on August 6th of 1777, the Oneida Indians fought with Herkimer at Oriskany and were very seriously damaged, including several of their leading warriors. So what was left of them came down here and presented Washington with food while the army was at Valley Forge, and served with Washington for the first part of the campaign of 1778. 50 Oneida Indians and Allen McLean and his cavalry. And they went out and they were right down along Ridge Pike, right down towards Chestnut Hill. Now remember, that's not Philadelphia, but they were going down because they were the lead point of this force. Howe and the boys, including his brother, Richard, William Howe, is giving a party. There are 3 of them. Great party called the Meschianza, basically orchestrated by Major Andre, who was a captain at that time. Andre is organizing this. It's a night jousting tournament at the Wharton Mansion, Walnut Hill, down in Philadelphia along the Schuylkill River. Hey, what's new? They sent out 400 invitations and 500 people came. There were 1,200 candles of high quality burning at the same time in the Wharton Mansion. Yes, that's the Wharton School, U of P. I would check them out. I think they're loyalists. In any event, hey, you have a problem. That he did not send out invitations that they were going to capture Lafayette. That's another myth. It may have been, but I think people got confused with the invitations for the Meschianza, which is not to capture Lafayette and bring him in as a prisoner at a banquet. So He's there at the banquet. His intelligence comes in from Galloway. Lafayette's out. He's out in full force. What do you want to do? Howe says, let's get him. Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't know this for years. I'm sorry. Too long? Or I didn't know this for years. Howe brings the entire army out. See, this is no joke here. I thought he just brought out a couple men, you know, like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 men. Subsequent research on my part, he brought out the entire army except for Leslie's brigade, 2,300 men that manned the fortifications in Philadelphia. So he put 6,000 men under him, Clinton, and Admiral Howe on the Germantown Pike, Germantown Avenue, going past Clifton, Mount Airy, 2 estates, Uppsala. I'm not sure Uppsala was built then, it was built later. And then into Chestnut Hill. At that point, an additional 2,000 men went with Grant, and an additional 3,000 or 4,000 men went with General No Flint Gray from the victory at Paoli and the Paoli massacre. And so No Flint Gray is no fool. And he is leading the very best in the British Army, including the Grenadiers, the Guards, light infantry, and 2 brigades of regular line. This was a powerful force coming to kill Lafayette. Idea, Howe comes right up the center. Captain Ewald and his Jaegers, the German hunters, with their rifles, short rifles, they're down along the river at Levering's Mill. That way. And Howe comes right up the Germantown Pike. Gray breaks off at Chestnut Hill, and he goes up a bit and then comes right down paralleling Ridge Pike to get in behind Lafayette and crush him. And Grant goes around Gray and goes right on up to the Broad Axe Inn. And I said we should go there tonight and have a Revolutionary War. But Joe said, and this is very clear, it was Joe. Joe said that, you know, we were going to give you, we have better hardtack and we are weevilly bread for you tonight anyway here. And why go to the Broad Axe? Because they'll charge us more because we don't own that. So we're not going to the Broad Axe. So they went to the Broad Axe, made a turn, came down what's today the Butler Pike. And they were very close to what's today Conshohocken at Matson's Ford. So there we have it. Now, to make a long story short, Lafayette's out there. He has 5 guns. He has Poor's Brigade, New Hampshire line. He has Varnum's Brigade. He has 50 Oneida Indians. He has McLean's men. And he also has cavalry. And he has 2 companies of Washington's Life Guard because Washington doesn't want to lose Lafayette. It would be a catastrophe for him to lose a member of the royal, the royal retinue at a place here. Could happen. So he gave him his own light infantry to guard him. So they're camped here and the men are asleep. And Lafayette is up in his tent and he's interviewing a woman to send her down to Philadelphia to get intelligence on the British movements. Lafayette is to see if the British are moving and if they're moving, which way. Are they going to New York? Are they getting back on the ships? Are they going by sea? Are they going by land? Are they getting ready to come and attack Valley Forge? And if they're retreating, Washington gave Lafayette the orders to go after them and attack their rear guard. So that's why Lafayette's here. Left 10 o'clock, 18th of May. 1000 hours. He left in the morning and he did not go across Sullivan's Bridge, contrary to rumors. He did not do that because he knew the British would be watching. So he went through the King of Prussia shopping center, which delayed him 2 months. And because the women following the army got caught up in the shopping. And the biggest jam was at Costco. And there's no question. So anyway, they went right, hey, the King of Prussia Inn. They went right past it on Gulf Road. They turned and went on Swedesford Road. They went and crossed at Swedes Ford, which is today Norristown, named after the Norris family who were there in the colonial period. And they turned, made a right turn on Ridge Pike and came right to here. So now they're here and they're asleep. And this Militia officer. Oh, I forgot Proctor. I'm sorry, not Proctor. I forgot the Pennsylvania militia. They were here and they were out on the far left to protect America, the American line from getting turned. They disappeared. We don't know where they are. If you see a group of 600 bedraggled men and some women wandering in the roads of Montgomery County, please do not dial 911. You'll agitate them. All you have to do is say militia and they'll disperse. All right? It takes Daniel Morgan, a Virginian, and actually a Pennsylvanian, to actually know how to handle the militia at Cowpens and Green at Guilford Courthouse. So it's going to take some time to work with them. Potter's militia disappears, which leaves the gate open for Grant to come through. Grant takes his position. They're going to move in. There's a militia officer up on a mill along the Wissahickon Creek, not far from here. And he hears and sees these British. And he falls out his window, the mill, and runs in his night clothes and borrows a horse and rides to camp, and he finds the men asleep. And the British are already moving. And so this is on the 19th. So basically, he warns Lafayette. Lafayette says this can't be true. He sends an aide out to do some recon. The aide comes back and said the British are behind us. They're in front of us. It's all over. We're going to die. And so they all commit suicide, and that's it. We lost the war. Any questions? Oh, see, I can't say anything. You're savvy enough to know. All right. So what do you have? You have his physician goes out and he finds a secret path, like the one that General Howe used, William Howe, to climb up to Quebec in the Plains of Abraham, because William Howe was involved there in French and Indian War and allowed Wolfe to beat Montcalm and to go on to capture Quebec. So a secret path. So now here's the whole significance. The whole British Army is coming. They are in position to create a great victory, change the whole course of the war maybe. Who knows? Lafayette, with 1/3 of Washington's army, is almost caught asleep. Pearl Harbor. He gets the men into column. He tells Varnum, stop Grant. In other words, don't stop him physically because he outnumbers you. But basically, stop him by skirmishing, slow him down, cut down trees, whatever you have to. So Varnum moves into the cemetery of St. Peter's Church, and he puts out his feelers, and Grant goes inert. And he pulls his men back, and he stops, and he's like spotlighted deer. And he just sits there, surrounded by half of his number. Gray is lost. Howe has stopped because he's waiting to get word from Grant by artillery fire, by courier, that Grant is making his attack and has engaged the Americans so that Howe can slip in before the Americans know what hit them. Alan McLean, charge of intelligence, and the United Indians and McLean's riders, they delay Howe. Puts the men into column. First, Enoch Poor and some of the cavalry. They march down this secret road, which I believe is something to do with Barren Hill Road today, which is right out here. Right down Barren Hill Road to Matson's Ford. Then followed by Varnum. Grant sees Varnum going down the road and says, they're trying to surround me. I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to attack. And so his men move towards St. Peter's Church and they capture it. Unfortunately, there are no Americans there. They're all going down the road. Grant knows he's in deep trouble. And he sends out his cavalry. They make a wrong turn. These streets in Pennsylvania are absolutely absurd. I mean, but I'm not going to go on that. I'm not going to go on that. They're well marked with wide shoulders. In any event, and you know this way, people let their foliage just grow right up into the road, so you can't see anything. I mean, anyway, the Americans get down to Matson's Ford. It's 3 to 4 feet deep, very fast current, no problem. You ever seen Northwest Passage with Spencer Tracy? Do you see his men going to St. Francis and they link arms and they go across the St. Francis River to get there? That's what the American line did down here at Matson's Ford. They got across the river without a loss of life. and they're waiting there on the other side. But there was a skirmish because the cavalry took Spring Mill Road, which is still here, Spring Mill Road. And so those of you who are excited can go and drive that right now, as soon as we're done. And you can recreate that, the British attack. They go right down to Spring Mill Road, go right to Madson's Ford, skirmish with the rear guard of the American line, and then dissipate. It's over. Howe is disgusted. He turns, marches his men back. They get there by about 8 o'clock that night to Philadelphia. No one will talk to Grant. No officer will talk to him. He comes to a bad military end. I mean, you know, bad career move there of what he did here. And that's a shame for him, not for us. So any event, that's the Battle of Barren Hill. Now, what happened? What's the significance? This was the first time the American Army used the tactics drill of von Steuben that they learned that winter, starting on February 22nd, 1778. And here it is, May 20th, and they're able to demonstrate the ability to move those men fast, under control, and together. They formed them in columns. The French always fought in columns. The British are the ones that fought in line, and Napoleon's going to fight in columns. And there's Lafayette and von Steuben having the Americans fight in columns. Although, you know, in the Civil War, it was mostly line. And then Emory Upton came along in Spotsylvania, and he acted like he invented the atomic bomb or something. No disrespect to anybody, but like he invented sliced bread, putting his men in columns and have them break through, punch through the Confederate lines at the Muleshoe. Well, this is what they did here. They got into column and they moved fast, and there was no straggling. And this demonstrated to Washington, which is why I said in the beginning, Lafayette, Washington talk, we have an army now. This is like drones. This is like the introduction of tanks. This is like the introduction of air power. The Americans now have a common system of drill. They are demonstrating that in battle, in action. This could have, a year earlier, you could have had that entire force captured. Several months earlier. But what happened is von Steuben was that effective. And he was successful because the people he trained carried it out. A month later, the Americans catch up to the British at Monmouth, a day like today, over 90, high dew point, and they showed what could be done. It was a tactical draw, but a strategic victory. And the men, particularly Wayne's men, Poor's men, coming off Churchill there, tenant meeting, Poor's men, Wayne's men, these guys really put on a show at the Causeway and other places along the Monmouth battlefield. From that point on, there was no further major military operations in the North. The British wanted nothing to do with the American regular army. So they turned to Charleston, Savannah, and they campaigned there until 1781, when that campaign eventually came to a close with Yorktown and all the battles that Greene lost, but won the war in the South. So you saw a devil of a fight all over the place down the South, but in the North, Washington just had to outlast the British because they really couldn't afford the manpower or the cost. Okay, I'm going home. I'm too old, and I need to retire again.
Paul, do you have time just for a couple?
Oh yeah,
questions? Thank you, Paul, very much.
Thank you.
Do we have microphones, or is it me here? It's me. Okay. Yes.
So when von Steuben was training the American troops, was that a typical line to do, is to run in columns versus lines for the German soldier?
No, it's mainly French. But remember, von Steuben, it was mainly a French tactic, but anybody could do it. It's just, will you train your men in how to do it? And so the British put had more confidence in using line attacks than column. There are disadvantages to both. There's no perfect system. But von Steuben taught them how to fight out of a column so they could do both. And that made them better because they had more tools in their toolbox. whereas the British rarely attacked in column, only when they were storming a fortification, normally. But out in the field, they didn't. But they could have.
Paul, I have a question from someone watching virtually. Was Lafayette seen by the British to be the key to the French-American alliance, and was this the reason for the British attack?
Well, Lafayette's role in the American Revolution, it's very hard to overstate that. He was able to advise Washington and provide Washington with a son he never had. And that's what Washington did, basically adopt him. If you go down to Mount Vernon today, the key to the Bastille is there in the antechamber there in the hallway of Mount Vernon. And you can see it there. It's still there today. And that was a gift from Lafayette to his papa. And Lafayette, they had such confidence in him that right away they were sending him to lead an expedition into Canada. And that was no joke. And that didn't come about, though, because of other internal problems with the Conway cabal and supply and demand in the encampment. He went back over to France, and he was able to persuade the French government, even though it was bankrupt, to continue to support and supply us with goods. We're one exception, well, not really one, we are one exception to the rule that with the support of the French, which was essential, vital, we used their weaponry, we used their uniforms. I mean, our line revolted on the way south to Yorktown. Now, remember, guys and gals, you know, they didn't know what was coming. But on the way to Yorktown, they stopped in Philadelphia and refused to move any farther until they were paid. Some officers weren't paid during the entire war. And that's why you had the Newburgh conspiracy that almost promoted Gates to being the general chief of the American forces and get rid of Washington. So what you have is you have the American line stops, and who saves us? Rochambeau comes up with his war chest, and in Chester, which has changed greatly since then, but that was the capital of Chester County. And people got tired of coming from Octorara and so forth and Morgantown all the way into Chester to do their government business, including jury duty and so on. So, you know, that's why we revolted. Chester Countyites revolted and declared ourselves free. And we took Chester and we left it to them, and we went on to have Westchester. So, but they came back in the 1850s and they found the middle of their little county, which is the smallest county in Pennsylvania, I think. They found the middle of their little county and they called it Media, in the middle. So, hey, that's where that leaves an extra tip, all right? All right, go ahead. Sorry.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Thank you very much for your animated and interesting presentation. I would encourage everyone, just as a little plug, in order to find out a chronological, scholarly progression of the Revolutionary War, to visit the Museum of the American Revolution, which is at 3rd and Chestnut. It is an excellent museum, and it will build on the knowledge that you have presented here and give maybe a greater understanding of it all. But thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I have one last question that we have online, and that is, had Lafayette failed, what would the outcome have been in the American Revolution?
Well, I'm going to not answer that, but I am going to answer it. And that makes perfect sense for me. I know it's confusing to you, but remember, you know, you still have dinner coming, and I don't want to agitate you. Stay confused. Look, historians are not really supposed to talk about what if. I'm so sick of hearing, you know, what if Stonewall Jackson hadn't been killed? You know, they would have won at Gettysburg. Well, screw you, man. This is war. And, you know, just like your pitcher goes down with an injury in the game and he doesn't play for the rest of the season, man, it's over. Jackson's dead. Get over it and get somebody else in there. I mean, what else are you going to do? So I can't tell you. I mean, if he had been captured, I doubt he would have been murdered. I think what would have happened, that's why Richard Howe, I'm sure that's why Richard Howe came out. to make sure that didn't happen, because this is politics. This is state politics. Remember, France lost an empire in the French and Indian War. It was no joke to them. They lost most of India and Canada, and the West India Islands. Hey, this is big time. That's why they're supporting us. Can you imagine an absolute monarch supporting a radical group of rebels? Rights of man? I mean, he's supporting it because it's to his benefit to beat the crap out of the British and get revenge. So I'm sure they wouldn't have killed him. They'd use him as a hostage, exchanged him. They might have made an example of him, put him in, you know, the Tower in London. But I don't think they would have slaughtered him. But I have no idea what would have happened because I'm an intelligence officer.
Ladies and gentlemen, Intelligence Officer Paul Sanborn. That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. I hope to have you back at some point for.
No, I'm busy. Look, I want to criticize you all. Seriously, when I'm talking to people and all, we usually produce a great deal of sawdust. And in fact, John is going to pay me by how much sawdust is collected after this is over, because people just pass out. I'm better than you name it, Ambien. And so, but this woman has discovered the real Sanborn, and she's brought it to all your attention. History can be a lot of excitement, a lot of interest. Damn it all, it's humans behaving. What else are you going to study? Whether you're a carpenter or a lawyer or a brain surgeon, it doesn't matter what you are. If you don't understand humans, you're at a disadvantage. And historians they're not perfect by any means. They're human, just like everyone else. But that's us. Don't forget it.
Thank you, Paul.
Excellent. Can I sprinkle a little sawdust?
Thank you. And speaking of human nature, we have three really great programs coming up. July 28th, we have Wayne Motz, who Paul mentioned, Pickett's Charge. That will be a civil war roundtable at the Union League of Philadelphia, 140 South Broad, Union League of Philadelphia. We have Stephen Freed, another Revolutionary War subject, Benjamin Rush, and that'll be at Torresdale on the 31st. And the 28th, we have a public affairs program with General Jack Keane, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I do want to mention on September 14th, we have a very special event, which will be our Frederick Douglass portrait unveiling. And if you would like to be in, this is a special event, meaning it's going to be very hard to get an invitation. In order to get an invitation, and I know this applies to most of you in the room, you have to be a benefactor of the Union League Legacy Foundation. And if you want to learn more about that, please contact me. I'm happy to send you an invitation, because everything that we do is made possible through the generosity of our members, and we appreciate that very much. One last introduction, and forgive me, President Mills, if you were here at the beginning of this program. I did not introduce you, but I will now. Please welcome President Craig Mills. And thank you, President Mills. Dinner will be for those of you staying for dinner. It is, where are we having dinner? The Marquee Ballroom. I have no idea where that is. But I like the connection with Lafayette, and Laura over there will show you where you're going. And Becca, if you don't know if you have the reservation, or I don't know if we have any more spots. Do we? We do. If you'd like to stay, please see Becca or Laura or Kira over here. Thank you very much. We'll see you at our next program. Good night.